Hi, everyone. Thanks for watching the Senior Series Resume Refresher Workshop. We decided to do this in career services because as seniors, you don't really need path credit. And in our office, we do quite a bit of partnership with the AVA program. So we decided to create a series of workshops for our seniors, a little bit smaller, a little bit more intimate, to share some information with you before you leave us and you graduate. So this is a refresher course on how to write your resume. And today we're going to review just some general resume refreshers. We're going to talk about tailoring your resume and looking for keywords. We're going to talk about marketing your skills and writing bullet points. We'll review how to work with applicant tracking systems. And we'll also talk about what happened in the summer of 2020. There's going to be some different dynamics that appear on your resume if you had canceled internships or because of the current situation we're in, your plans changed. So let's go ahead and get started. First, let's take a look at these general resume refreshers. I have a feeling a lot of you have heard these and heard these debated in the past, but I'm going to start with using a college address or a permanent address. Throughout your college career, using one address is perfectly appropriate. You may even have decided to get rid of the address on your resume and you just have your contact information, and that's perfectly fine. When you're a senior, I strongly recommend either using just one address. You see some templates with two addresses, your college address and your home, but use just your one address, or even make the decision to not include the address at all. That's actually perfectly appropriate on today's resumes. The second thing that has a lot of debate is whether to include an objective on your resume. It's great for first year student resumes. I think it's great for underclassmen resumes. You can be really specific about what you're looking for. For instance, you could say a marketing internship for the summer of 2021. However, you do want to delete the objective once you hit your senior year and you're starting that full-time job search. Employers just don't really deem them very necessary when they're looking at graduate level resumes. The next debatable item that needs to be refreshed is high school. Unless you are using high school as a networking tool, you really do need to delete this off of your resume by your senior year. Now, what do I mean by using it as a networking tool? If you've decided that you're going to return to your home city and you're going to live and work and look for a job, and you went to a fairly prestigious high school in your area and you know that there are quite a few alumni that are living and working in the city, sometimes having them see that you attended the same high school is a very good networking tool, and it's a good way to make a connection. So that's when we deem that having high school on your resume would be appropriate. The next section is college coursework. I don't see this too much anymore, which is really great. We used to use it for underclassmen because sometimes they just didn't have a lot of experience. They were in the process of building experiences. So showing employers what coursework they had completed up to that point in their college career could be useful to help them securing internships. But this is one of those things that is, again, you get to your senior year, you're looking at the full-time job search, it's time to take that college coursework section out of your resume. Now, I'm going to show you something in a college coursework section when we get to what happened in summer of 2020, but hold that thought and we'll get to it. Where it is appropriate to keep this section is if you are writing a resume and you're using that resume to apply for graduate school, then it's okay for that section to come back in to play. Next is the skills section. I find this a very polarizing section when it comes to resumes. I personally and professionally don't particularly care for this. I find that we run the risk of listing skills that are already seen on the resume, especially in the content and the bullet points that you are writing, because those bullet points are specifically designed for you to highlight your skills. And if it's repetitive, then you're not really telling your reader or the employer anything particularly new. Where I think that it is appropriate to use this section is if you have quite a bit of technical skills maybe some popular software packages that not everybody is going to have in your career field, and it's good to show that you have some unique experiences. Language skills are good to put in this particular section. Again, they can be fairly unique for a lot of us. That's when I'm okay with the skills section. But for the most part, if it's just to list your soft skills and your transferable skills that can be seen in the bullet points, I don't know that you need to have this particular section. And then positions and activities that you've held in high school. So that includes student organizations, some work experiences, service experiences. What you really have to do is determine, is it time to get rid of these experiences or should they cycle off? So if they were shorter term positions in high school and activities and service during high school, these should probably cycle off the resume. If you've had one position that you started and you maintained it from high school all the way through your college career, where you were working summers and doing summer breaks, now that I would keep on your resume because that shows reliability, dependability, and longevity. And if you kept coming back and returning to this position after each year in college, it's most likely that you have a very strong reference that you can use from this position, and you're going to be able to show a lot of transferable skills. So that's the one time that I say keep a high school position on your resume. The only other type of activity or service in terms of how impactful it's going to be, that's what you want to think about. How impactful was this experience? Do I have other college experiences that may eclipse what happened in high school? But there are some unique experiences. So an Eagle Scout would be an example of a pretty impactful activity and or service that you probably want to keep on that senior level resume as a college student. There's stories to be told about being in the Scouts and achieving that highest level of achievement that you can within the organization. So that's something, an example of what I would keep. Some additional refreshers. Definitely work to keep your resume to one page. This debate just keeps swinging back and forth every couple of years, but at the moment in 2021, we are very much in a one-page resume world. If you have quite a bit of experience and it's completely relevant to the job description, I sometimes, especially seniors, who are very accomplished groups of people, if it stretches into 2 pages, just make sure that the information is absolutely relevant to the position or the situation that you are applying to. And do not ever let your resume exceed more than 2 pages throughout your entire career. Once it goes past 2 pages, they're just not going to read it. Of course, you've heard this a million times. Ensure your resume is error-free and grammatically correct. When there are errors on the resume or the grammar is slightly off, that is an indication of how detail-oriented you are. It's also a reflection of your professionalism. So you do want to make sure that you are always putting your best foot forward and that the resume always be error-free. We talked about the irrelevant experiences as your college career and even as your career has progressed after graduation. So you are constantly doing the relevancy test to see, does this need to be on my resume? Is it relevant to the position that I'm applying to? So that's something that you're going to be doing constantly each time that you update your resume. And I recommend that you watch the paralysis by analysis syndrome, which is having your resume reviewed just one too many times. I think that it's good to have your roommate, a parent, someone in career services, a faculty member take a look at your document. But after about that 4th or 5th review, you're starting to get a lot of competing opinions. The reason for that is resume review is extremely subjective. Everybody has their own personal little things that bother them about resumes. They'll advise you on such. So you get lots of different pieces of information, and suddenly you don't know where to turn because sometimes that information can be rather conflicting. You may get someone who says, oh, a 2-page resume is perfectly fine, but then you come to career services and we say, well, only if it's really, really relevant, and work really hard to keep it to 1 page if you can manage that. Here's what you need to keep in mind. If you start to get too many opinions about your resume and it's reviewed one too many times, The folks that are reviewing your resume have your best professional interest at heart. They want you to put your best foot forward. So they're not trying to create confusion, but you will have to sort of buckle down and decide which pieces of information you're going to take and what others are you going to set aside. So try not to get it, have it reviewed, but don't get it over reviewed. All right, next we're going to talk about tailoring your resume. And I'm going to talk about building a master resume. So this is the concept right now that's extremely popular in job search and how we're handling our documents. There was a point in time for a very, very long time, as a matter of fact, where you would write one resume, it would cover all your skills. Maybe there were 2 or 3 different types of positions that you were looking for, and you just use the same resume to apply for all those different positions and also across various different industries, and it just doesn't work that way anymore. So what we advise is that you start by creating what we call the master resume. So this is pretty much every experience that you've had, all the positions, the duties, the activities, the leadership um, experiences and awards, everything that you've done throughout your college career and dabble a little bit into high school at this point, if it's still relevant, and create this master document. And this master document might be more than one page. It might be 2 or 3 pages, but you're never sending the master resume out. You're using it strictly as a master. Your goal will be that each time you find that job description and that position that you want to apply to, you're going to take bits and pieces of that master resume and you're going to assemble a really tidy and tight industry specific resume. You're going to update the verbs, delete any irrelevant positions or tasks, but you're going to make it very, very focused and tailored to the position and the industry that you are applying to. So this means instead of when you look at your desktop and you've got one resume in a folder waiting to get sent out to everyone, now in a folder you're going to have a master resume and then a whole lot of other resumes that are labeled for each organization that you're going to be applying to. So changing of verbs, doing some tweaking, adding those very, very important keywords to the resume so that they match the job description. That's kind of the name of the game these days. Is it a lot of work? It is absolutely a lot of work, but it is what is helping individuals break through the rest of the crowd and be able to get the interview. Because recruiters, and I hate to say it, machines, when we talk about applicant tracking systems, are seeing exactly what they're looking for. And that's your goal, is to tailor as much as possible. Well, how do you go about doing that? You've done the master resume, but now you've got to create these industry specific resumes. So this is where you do your tailoring and you have to really focus on keywords. So your mission, if you choose to accept it, is that you have to learn the language of your industry and your occupation. So in order to do that, search as many job postings, use the job boards, look at LinkedIn profiles, look at company websites, read even their mission, vision, goal statement, see what kind of keywords they're looking for. You'll get an indication of skills, types of people, culture that's out there within organizations, and go ahead and start tracking what you're seeing over and over again. Now, there's a process that you can go to actually uncover these keywords, and that's using word clouds in order to identify those key skills and those wonderful keywords that are out there. So use websites such as Wordle, it's hard to say, Wordle, or Tagoo, or Word It Out. And what you're going to do is you're going to find 5 to 10 job postings from various resources. So this is going to be for one occupation. And then you're going to scan those job descriptions into one of these tools. And then it's going to come up with a word cloud. We all love word clouds. They look nice. And what you'll see is where those predominant keywords are sticking out, and you'll know that you're onto something in terms of being able to use those keywords when you're tailoring your resume. It is recommended when you use this method that you repeat the process maybe 2 or 3 different times, just so that you're making sure that you're going to be consistent and that you're finding those common words. It's one of those Sunday afternoon projects that you would have to engage in to make sure that you're getting consistent information. Well, I did this, And I did this for a social media marketing position. It was, I'm sorry, a social media coordinator position. And this is what came out. It's a little small, but you can see all of the larger words and what's coming up the most. So you better be digitally savvy, have a marketing acumen, understand social media quite in depth, be team oriented, be client focused, have experience in SEO, lots of Google and Google Analytics, know how to strategize. The word campaign comes up a lot, so leading campaigns, brand management, things of that nature, understanding platforms. Facebook came up in this, you can see it. Accounts and branding is something else that's available. So that's one way for you to suss out those keywords in order to be tailoring your resume. All right, I'm going to move on to marketing your skills and writing effective bullet points. So you've gone through this process, you've done some research, you've got your resume up and running. Now you have to write some really strong bullet points for each of your experiences so that you can incorporate the skills that you have. And those skills need to be in alignment with the keyword matching with the job descriptions. Well, how do you go about doing that? This is probably the hardest part of writing your resume. And I developed an activity. It's a brainstorming activity that I use in classroom presentations. I use it in one-on-one appointments with students to get people brainstorming about where their skills lie within their experiences. The exercise involves you picking any kind of experience that's going to be on your resume, whether it was a job, an academic experience, or something extracurricular. And then you're going to brainstorm these three questions. What are or were your big picture responsibilities? What tasks did you use to meet those responsibilities? And what skills did you use to complete those tasks to meet your responsibilities? Don't censor anything, especially when we get to the task part. We have a tendency to want to censor out, oh, that's too basic. I can't say that I did that. Well, no, include everything, because you do want to get a clearer picture of everything that you did, so that when you get to writing your bullet points, you're going to have these really nice statements that are a combination of your skills, your accomplishments, and some of your tasks, so that individuals understand what you did. So you've gone through the exercise. Now you've got to write your bullet points. And we use this a lot in career services, so some of you may have seen this a lot. You can look at the first example. It's pretty generic, and it's a vague statement for the local philanthropy society. As an event coordinator, this person planned charity events. Well, that's great, but it doesn't really tell us much. Now, I'm going to tell you something. I have a colleague who does resume writing. She's very, very good. But when she looks at bullet points, the one thing that she asks when she reads a bullet point is, what is the so what factor? Now that sounds kind of cheeky and rude, so what? But it's actually a good question to ask. Why did you put this on your resume? Why is this important? Why do you want me to read this? So clearly we need more meat to these bullet points. They, just like the slide says, they need to be strong, descriptive, and if you can quantify information, that's what we need to be doing. So the second example as an event coordinator is much stronger. Coordinated 3 fundraising events for local shelters, which raised over $8,000, 20% over goal, and greatly improved community awareness. The breakdown of that statement is that you notice that it starts with an action verb. Action verbs are those strong verbs that help us highlight our skills and highlight keywords within our bullet statements. So every statement you write should start with an action verb. If you go to the Career Services website, under the Student tab, under Resumes and Cover Letters, you'll find a resume writing guide with a list of action verbs, a really long list of action verbs. So when you're writing bullet points, pull up that list of action verbs, because it sort of helps you find the flow of your language and what you're trying to communicate. We add in a little description about the project, that 3 fundraising events for local shelters, and there was a little bit of quantification in there, which was really great. And then the result, what happened? What's the so what factor? We raised some money. It was 20% over goal. That's an accomplishment statement. And we also increased community awareness for the society. we finish it up with more of an accomplishment statement. So when you read this, it looks like you have absolutely accomplished something. Now, not all bullet points have an accomplishment. Some will and some won't, and that's okay. As long as you have a good mix within each position, I think you'll be very fine. But at the very least, you want your bullet points to have the action verb, describe a little bit of the task, which is the project, and definitely what is the result. Okay, so a good mix of not all will have accomplishment and a mix of some statements that will have accomplishment. You also won't be able to quantify every time, but again, if you have a variety of statements where you can just a few where you're quantifying here and there, again, you're going to strike a really good balance in terms of your bullet points. All right, so here's an example of which is better. So we have the first one, and then take 10 seconds to review the second one. Clearly, the second one is the much stronger set of bullet points. So we have quantified how many guests were served each shift that you worked, and we really focus on customer service, which is a transferable skill, because in that is your interpersonal skills, your ability to communicate, to respond to people's needs, to adjust your communication styles, but also to work in a fast-paced environment and be accurate and detail-oriented. There's also an accomplishment statement in there, which was awarded Server of the Month, based on providing that really good customer service. All right, so that second example is a really good mix of an accomplishment statement and a statement that is task, result, and skill oriented. All right, our next refresher is to talk about applicant tracking systems. All right, so does anybody know this guy? So this is a meme from the movie Office Space. Office Space came out in 1999. I think as seniors in college, you were either not born yet, or maybe you were just very little babies. But it didn't do very well in the theaters. But when it was released after being in the theater, it actually became a cult hit. So I highly recommend that you go and find it and watch it, because it's all about finding your purpose and finding your calling in work, but in a very funny and absolutely cheeky way. And this is my favorite character, my favorite guy. We talk about applicant tracking systems quite a bit these days, but it is important to understand how are you going to get your resume noticed by artificial intelligence, which is the primary thing that is reading your resume today, as opposed to a human seeing it first. It's a computer that sees it first. So we have to get savvy about how can I get noticed when I have to upload my resume to all these electronic applications. And it's the electronic computerized system that's actually reading the document. Okay, so applicant tracking systems, they are software platforms that are programmed to process and scan resumes, and they do it by looking for keywords. So what you have is an organization who is using an applicant tracking system. As you can see, there's quite a bit listed here in terms of the brands of applicant tracking systems that are out there. What happens is a recruiter will put a job description into an applicant tracking system, and they'll go ahead and enter all the keywords that they're looking for on the resumes, so that when everybody applies for the job, the recruiter goes in, wants to see the results of the application process. What they basically do is they send the system off to say, okay, show me all of the resumes that have 80% of the keywords that match the job description that I am trying to fill. So if you fulfill 80% of those keywords, if the system sees 80% of them, then there's a chance your application is going to bubble to the top and you're going to be called in for an interview. So that's essentially, in a nutshell, how these particular systems work. About 90% of employers use applicant tracking systems today. So that's our Fortune 50, all the way down to our even smaller companies that now, they have 50 employees. But I talked to a small local government here in the Dayton area about a month or two ago, and yep, they use applicant tracking systems when they're hiring as well. So everybody is kind of using them today. So the goal is you've got to understand how they work. One of the things that happens is if you meet about 80% of finding those keywords on your resume, then you're going to get a score of anywhere from 1 to 10. So the higher your score, the higher the chances that you're going to get called in for an interview. The other thing that this does is it wants to calculate years of experience. That means that on your resume, you want to make sure that when you depict your work experiences, that you list the month and the year. So month and year to month and year, because this is what applicant tracking systems are reading. So if you just put in, I worked for this organization from 2019 to 2020, it's not going to be able to read that. And that way it's not going to know how many years of experience that you have. And that's another criteria that the recruiter is going to program into the system and want to see what kind of resumes are going to come up. Okay, couple of things. When we talk about applicant tracking systems, sometimes we overlook that networking in terms of your job search is still very much alive and well. Usually it doesn't matter, even if you've networked your way into becoming aware of a position and you are connected to someone within an organization. Regardless of that networking connection, you're probably still going to have to fill out an electronic application and be subject to an applicant tracking system, but that's okay. If you have good connections within an organization and you see a position that has been posted, reach out to your contact, let them know that they've applied, because they can go into the system and look up your application and your resume, or they can encourage their human resources department to help you get the process rolling. Don't have any contacts within an organization, do a little bit of work to connect with a few people that work within the organization, nurture the relationship a little bit before you start asking and making people aware that you're applying. And then after you've applied for the position, go back to your new contacts and say, just wanted you to know there was a position posted for XYZ. So I went ahead and completed the process. If you can give me any tips on what you look for in interviews or just company culture, that would be great. Again, you cannot come right out and ask someone to pull your application, look at it, and give it to human resources, but you can ping them and sort of approach it from a sideways approach and just ask for additional information about the company, their experience within the organization. So there's just lots of ways to tip someone off that you are in the system. So don't overlook that you can do a little bit of networking in conjunction with working with these systems. All right, we've talked about tailoring and keywords quite a bit. The reason for that is whether you've got a human reading your resume or you've got the applicant tracking system reading your resume, the point is the resume has to be readable. So we're keyword rich, right? We've got that taken care of on our tailored resume. Well, now we got to watch our formatting, because these applicant tracking systems can get kind of messed up if the resume has got too many formatting features on the document. So what we advise is you want to do your resume in Word and type it, I like to call this freehand, quote unquote, which means that you're not using a template, you're not using all different types of add-ons such as text boxes and tables and multiple columns and images and content and having a header and a footer and all of that type of thing, because all these add-on features get in the way of these systems being able to actually read your resume. So just a quick word about templates. The slide says, do not use templates. And that makes me a little sad, because between Google and Word and other resources, there's some really beautiful, sharp, and professional looking resume templates out there for you to use. But the problem is, because they're templates, they have all this extra add-on features that get in the way. So you may see certain templates, if they're really clean and they're really professional looking, not too much fancy stuff, and you can type them out freehand, use them and use that as a resource to kind of give you that guiding criteria for what to put on your resume, but you really want to stay away from the templates in order for the applicant tracking systems to find you. The other hard thing, and I can't even believe I'm saying this because it just means that managing your resume and applying for a job can just be so much work. But if you want to take it to the next level, investigate the nuances of applicant tracking systems. And a way to do that is wherever you have found the job posting, take a really good look at the URL. And you can usually see the name of the organization that the company is using in terms of their applicant tracking system platform. So you can see on this slide, this URL I have, I highlighted that Taleo. Taleo is a company that makes applicant tracking systems. Find that, go online, do a quick search that says, what do I need to know about getting my resume read properly by Taleo? And you'll get a whole bunch of information about how Taleo is designed and programmed to read resumes, and then you can adjust your resume accordingly. Yes, that's a lot of work. I realize that. Another thing that you can do, maybe a little less complicated, is there's a pretty amazing website called JobScan out there. It's got all kinds of job search and resume and cover letter type of resources. With JobScan, you can scan in your resume, scan in a job posting, and it will actually do a comparison and tell you, you have this many keywords on your resume and you're good to go. Go ahead and apply. Or you don't have enough keywords, you might want to work on it just a little bit more. So that's another way to make sure that you have enough keywords on your resume. And JobScan is just a little less complicated than doing hardcore research on applicant tracking systems. But sometimes that does pay off. Okay, we're done with tailoring the resume and keyword searching and applicant tracking systems. We're going to talk a little bit about what happened in summer of 2020. As you know, lots of interesting things went on. If you're a Walking Dead fan, I actually got into Google Images and did a search for summer of 2020 memes, and this came up, and I absolutely loved it because I think it was very appropriate for what we experienced. What did you experience last summer? Think about this for a minute. Did you have an internship that got canceled? Did the internship transition from being in person to remote? Did it go from being 10 weeks to 6 weeks? Did you end up taking an essential job? Did the wheels just completely fall off and you decided, you know what, I'm going to go take a couple of extra courses and get some training, and I'll do that instead? So a lot of weird things went on last summer, and especially for you as the graduating class, you have to figure out how to represent what happened on your resume. Here's the most important thing that employers are looking for: be able to tell your story in an interview, or in first on your resume and then in an interview. If it's, well, I lost every opportunity, so I basically sat at the pool for the whole summer, or I played video games, that's kind of not the story that you want to be telling. You need to have a story about how you pivoted in this particular situation. So I have a lot of examples of how to format some of the ways that things changed for us last summer. So I'm going to go through a number of these. First thing, some very unique experiences emerged in the summer of 2020. There's a really interesting organization called Upkey. They help students develop professionally in a number of different ways. And one of the ways that they did this is they created about 1,500 virtual internships. And these were actually 8 to 10 week internships that went on. And there were with all different types of companies. And the students had an opportunity to really do some tremendous skill building. Upkey is getting some legs and popularity. And by the time it pushed out that it had these 1,500 internships, over 6,000 people applied for them. So if any of you had a chance to secure one of these opportunities, it's okay to say that you were selected from a really competitive process. That's very, very important. So if you look at this, you can see that there's some tremendous skill development, and there's quite a bit of professional development within this particular example. Coursework is the other thing that became really popular. If internships got shortened in terms of weeks and hours, or they got canceled, a lot of students said, you know what, this is perfectly fine. I'm going to go ahead and get a couple of extra courses under my belt or work a little bit closer toward my degree requirements. It'll help me get caught up or even get ahead. So this is amazing. This is part of your story. So what you would do is you could do this in your education section after um, your degree information. So you can look, we've got the degree information listed, and then we've got a couple of bullet points. So in summer of 2020, we completed coursework. What I want you to notice is that the internship um, cancellation is noted in the description, and that's actually pretty appropriate. It's okay to say that your internship got canceled. And then the second bullet point, we talk about growing industry knowledge, and it focuses on some of the skills that you developed in this particular course. So here's another course in digital marketing that was completed. Now, this is for someone who's got the relevant coursework section on their resume. Remember what I said about the coursework section, don't really need it on your resume, but if you're tracking to graduate school and you want to list some courses, this is actually the perfectly appropriate place to put it if you took some courses over last summer. All right, summer employment. For some of you, it was, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and be an essential worker. I'm going to go ahead and work where I need to be working. So the example we chose was working at Kroger, and not only doing customer service, but working in inventory. Some tremendous skills to be built in this arena. It's a great story to tell an employer. Yeah, my internship got canceled, but I realized I've got to be working over the summer. I decided to become an essential worker. And here are the skills I built when I worked for Kroger over the summer. Again, wonderful story to tell. And guess what? Employers, they understand that things got really wacky last summer. So they just want to hear what you did, and they're going to be very open to all different types of experiences. This next one is a remote internship. So if you notice, that very first bullet point says transition seamlessly from an in-person to a remote work situation due to COVID-19. Again, it is appropriate to go ahead and communicate what actually happened. And you want to talk about that transition because a lot of us had to move very quickly from functioning in person to working solely online. And it's a different set of skills, different and overlapping. Work is work, right? So there's a lot of skills that overlap with working in person and working remotely, but there's also some new skills that you develop as a remote worker that you really want to market at this point to employers. Because right now, I'm recording this in April of 2021. We have a lot of employers that are trying to figure out that when people can come back to work and not work remotely anymore, will they in fact do that? Will it be working remotely? Will it be working in person? Will it be a blended model? So employers are going to be looking for individuals who have those two skill sets. Yeah, I can work in person and show up every day at work, no problem. Have the great interpersonal skills to do that, be a strong team player. But can I work somewhat independently, function well in virtual meetings, build relationships in teams and rapport if I'm working from home and remotely? Those are all really strong skills that employers are going to be looking for. So if you have them and this happened to you, market that. The next experience is micro internships. So kind of similar to Upkey, and the work that was done was remote. Micro internships are exactly that. They're very project-based. 2-week, 4-week, 6-week experiences where you're working on a project. It may not be full-time. It may be part-time, just like this example says, working 20 hours a week. I think it's okay to quantify the amount of work and the length of the experience in a bullet point when you have a micro internship. The thing about micro internships is they're small, but they're mighty because it's pretty intense and you build some hardcore skills within these experiences. So something else that you can share with employers, and they'll be impressed that you got creative and looked for a micro internship. Okay, this next one is what we call credentialing. So some of you had opportunities to participate in corporate leadership or training programs that maybe lasted just 2 or 3 days long. But what they do is they give you an opportunity to earn, some of the wording is you would earn a badge in a certain skill. The fancy word is you earned a credential in a certain skill. But this is perfectly appropriate to highlight on a resume. We decided the best place to highlight this would be in your education section, and you could call it an alternative digital credentialing program. And this one came from the AT&T Summer Learning Academy, which was a real program. And some of our students earned a couple of badges in terms of their skills. All right, so that wraps up the summer of 2020 and how to represent these experiences that we all have gone through, that you went through as a junior, as a rising senior, and coming into your senior year. So hopefully that was helpful in you determining how do I refresh my resume and get some of these more unique experiences or explain what happened last summer on my resume. So thanks for watching this first presentation in the senior series. We've also recorded the presentation for your graduating what's next. That's actually a presentation on you got the job, but how do you manage yourself in terms of professionalism in the workplace, do a little bit of career management, but it also talks about things like, oh, I have my own healthcare benefits and I have to sign up a retirement program. How do I do that? So it's just some basics of you got your first job, here are some really good things that you need to know. And then there's Hope in the Job Search was also recorded. And that is just to help you, again, kind of a refresher on job search strategy and to help you understand that as you're getting into your job search, you may be deep into it right now and it'll carry in through the month of May. Be persistent. The job market is not looking too bad. So be very, very persistent. There's quite a bit of opportunity out there. I thank you and please visit Career Services, schedule an appointment with a career advisor if you need any assistance from our office. As a graduating senior, I want to remind you that you are a flyer for life and we're always here to help you with your career planning and your career management. Good luck, everyone.